So, hi everyone. So my name is Sona, and I will be presenting along with Alex Kilgore, who is an Extenda Fellow in Health Outcomes and Market Access. Today we'll be presenting on marketing and market research. I think Namosha had mentioned as well, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll be able to answer them at the end of the call. Okay, so intro to marketing. So what's it like in industry? So marketing is a really fun space. It's really where you're able to promote the development and support of the medications for the patient, but it can also be, trying to tailor messages for healthcare providers as well. So it's a really kind of double-sided sort of being able to interpret this information for both audiences. Within marketing as well, you're also collaborating with KOLs, MSLs, of course, everyone across the board with research and development, clin dev, med affairs. So you're really able to kind of work along the full spectrum of everyone within the pharmaceutical company, which is awesome. Next slide, please. Perfect. So kind of looking at the pharmacist's role in the drug development process. So the last few weeks, you guys heard quite a bit about R&D, med affairs, but today we'll be focusing a little bit more on the commercial and the market access standpoints. So within commercial, some folks usually think of it as it's really just kind of the end of the whole process. Maybe phase 4, you're looking at commercial or marketing, which is actually not the case. So with commercial and marketing, you're really kind of looking full spectrum. You're looking from the very beginning what marketing teams can do. So even when it comes to phase 1 clinical trials, say there's a very effective endpoint within your product, that's something that marketing teams can bring to the table when they're moving forward with this product or presenting information to FDA or to healthcare providers as well. So marketing is really looking at key effective messages and how we're able to play that out to either healthcare providers or even to patients to essentially promote and support the product that you have. A lot of marketing as well is also very component of being able to differentiate what's unique about your product. And so again, you really have to be able to understand the clinical side of things, but also be able to tailor that message accordingly. We can also see that there's patient advocacy. So sometimes pharma companies might try to do consumer campaigns, for example. So they'll really try to help advocate their product to the patient and recognize, what is the patient like with their current disease state and how can our product help? So there's really a lot of aspects to commercial and marketing. It's really looking at the consumer side of things, of course, but also looking at prescribing practices of physicians and how you're able to kind of change that based on how they're presented with information. And then we'll also kind of touch base a little bit later. Alex will talk about market research and managed markets as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. So what is marketing? So marketing is really the commercial center of a pharmaceutical company. And so like I had mentioned, it's translating these commercial strategies and these platforms into what the company is going to do next. So a lot of times we'll look at what are the competitors in the market and what makes our product different. And that's really kind of the major selling point of how you're going to get your product across to providers. Are they going to prescribe your product because it's efficacious, it has better dosing? So these are things that you have to consider when you're in marketing. So a lot of the folks on my team as well, we really have to dive into the data. We have to understand kind of the backbone of how we're able to make these effective messages. And if the message doesn't make sense, or if you're over-promising a message, that can also be a problem. So you really have to look at okay, so yeah. And make sure that it's effective enough so that even the FDA doesn't call you guys, because it doesn't call the pharmaceutical company out because you might be over-promising. So it's really looking at the managed markets, the sales team, and how you're going to bring these messages so that it's effective. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. Perfect. So now we'll dive into patient marketing. So like I mentioned, there's kind of two sides of this spectrum. There's really patient marketing and healthcare provider marketing as well. So something that I'm currently working on is promotion. So I do a little bit of both, but both are very important within the commercial and marketing space. And we'll kind of dive into that now. So with patient marketing, a lot of times you'll have to identify and prioritize who you're really targeting. So it could be based on maybe age. So again, if for this product, if it's some sort of indication where you have to focus on a particular age, then that's something you want to focus on when you create your messages so that your audience knows who it's actually related to. Gender. So if you look at birth control as an example, sometimes you'll see it, really tailored, very feminine kind of products, and those are related to obviously, females. So a lot of times the marketing really has to tailor to the exact audience, and that's something that's heavily researched and something that is agreed upon across the whole pharmaceutical company, because that's really who your audience is, and of course the prescriber has to be on board with that too, because they're the ones prescribing to these patients. So common example here. So if we're kind of looking at young adults, so maybe it's something related to acne, for example. So a lot of young adults have acne. So a pharmaceutical company might think it will be effective to put a lot of money into advertisements for on Facebook, for example, or on YouTube. So a lot of web-based programs where they'll be able to reach these young adults. So a lot of marketing also is really tailoring to your audience, and that's kind of an important and really fun part of being in marketing. Thanks. So pharmacist role. So really with the knowledge of their patients, you have to understand and kind of get a feel of the patient themselves and what they're going through. So for example, if you're trying to promote a product for people who have cancer, and this product does an amazing job of curing that cancer, you want to definitely bring that to the table in that component. A lot of the patient experience when you're trying to market a product is going to be really pivotal in how you end up tailoring that message as well. So in regards to the brand, some or almost majority of products for cancer, for example, really focus on strength and courage and being able to help cure this disease. And so a lot of companies really try to bring this key components of what the brand is trying to bring within their messaging and how they promote the product. So as we can see in this example here, it says, we are proof that this product is working for us. So really trying to bring in that patient aspect is something that's very important with many, many products, because at the end of the day, these products are being used on patients, and patients want something where they can see that the end user is getting a lot of benefit out of the product. And also looking at applying it to, go back, please. Perfect, thanks, Maz. So also looking at the clinical and medical expertise. So like I mentioned, they work collaboratively across the team. So a lot of key opinion leaders can be giving advice and kind of helping understand the patient's value or even the prescriber's kind of influence with prescribing these medications. So a lot of times you'll see the marketing teams trying to get insights from MSLs or KOLs to again really understand the background of how the practice is being, or how the medication is being prescribed, and what messages or what kind of key components physicians are looking for when they actually prescribe these products. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So now we'll dive into healthcare provider marketing. So again, it's totally different, right? So now we're really looking at more so the efficacy standpoint. How effective is it going to be for both the patient taking it, adherence? We're looking at different components. It's a totally different audience. And so we definitely have to execute that out. And a lot of times, physicians, they read scientific journals. So there's a lot of advertisements being made within big journals like AMA or JAMA, things like that. So sometimes there's advertisements that pharmaceutical companies create to be put in these scientific journals. Of course, you have your conference exhibitions. Obviously, as you all know, that has taken a total drastic change with COVID-19. There's a lot of more webinars. There's a lot different ways to present information now. And that's something that's very prominent with how you're able to execute that information out. And then, as many of you know, there's obviously speaker programs and office visits that are done by the sales teams. So those are also something that marketing can also be a part of, because they're the ones putting together the brochures, the pamphlets, and everything in that and deliverable. All of that information is put through by marketing teams. Next slide, please. Perfect. So like I mentioned, for the scientific journal advertisements, this is an example here. So as you can see, they really kind of point out the main big differences with this new medication, right? It's one bag, there's no mixing, no measuring, it's easy to use, it's accessible. So really, again, with marketing, you have to figure out those key components or those key messages that you want to execute out to your audience, and make it well known, make it something that's very prominent within your advertisement. You only have one chance to kind of execute out this information, so make sure you do it well, and make sure you do it concisely. And as you can see, it always has to be fair, balanced, and accurate, because the FDA is monitoring. The company itself is typically looking through this information and making sure that you're not overpromising. The reason for that is because you don't want to overpromise that your patient is going to get cured, instantly, and is going to be phenomenal and turn into someone like super gorgeous and have all these other things, right? You have to be very true to the data, and that's something that's very highly regulated, especially within marketing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So of course, conference exhibition. So obviously a lot of this has changed, this past year, but there is still a lot of ability and opportunity for marketing teams to make materials. And so a lot of even what I do now is creating different brochures, flashcards, promotional materials to really execute out the information, but in different kind of fun ways for healthcare providers to really see the information. It's fast, it's easy, it's accessible over the internet or just via email. So there's different ways that you can deploy this information, but marketing teams, you really have to make sure that they're always kind of staying relevant, and always able to kind of pinpoint those key messages that you want to take across to your audience. Next slide, please. Perfect. So again, like I had mentioned, kind of repeating here, but in service or office visits, you're having your sales team go out and effectively communicate with the providers to market their products. So telling them about your product, giving them promotional materials to kind of say, like, this is what we do, this is our data, current data, and how it differentiates from other products. So always staying in communication with your healthcare provider, telling them the most current updates is always going to be important, and something marketing teams have to be aware of new data that comes out, and have to make sure that they can effectively communicate that data as well. And very similar kind of function with the speakers program. Obviously, most of those are now done over webinars, Zoom webinars, but again, really have to be kind of concise with how you present information, and make it relevant for the healthcare provider who's prescribing. Perfect. And now I'll hand it over to Alex.
All right, thanks, Tona. So now we'll discuss payer marketing, which back to some of Sona's points earlier, is that there's different perspective for each stakeholder involved with the healthcare system and getting drugs to patients. And that's no different in terms of engaging with payers, which is going to be a completely different approach than if you're engaging with a KOL or a physician or patients, because the perspective and what matters and what resonates most with payers is going to be different than what is more important to some of these other stakeholders. And so that's where the term market access comes into play, where manufacturers will engage with payers to really make sure that on a large scale, their products are going to be able to be accessed by patients. And definition here, the discipline that addresses any financially based consideration or hurdle to drug prescribing and use. And so back to the point of the different perspective, in this case, one of the most important things is cost. At the end of the day, cost is a very important thing in terms of healthcare delivery, patient access. And so payers are constantly with a finger on the pulse of the cost that comes with any care that's going to be delivered to patients. And so with that in mind, different manufacturers and stakeholders within the healthcare system have to keep that in mind in terms of when they're engaging with payers. Next slide. So back to that point, you could see a few things here. Payers, of course, have a lot of influence in decision making and prescribing because at the end of the day, they serve as that gatekeeper in terms of which products will end up getting prescribed. Of course, healthcare providers have a say in that, but payers also have a big say in terms of what will be covered, what will be paid for, what will be reimbursed in terms of patient care. And so within the payers, the different perception of clinical value is a little bit different in terms of the healthcare providers in general, but there's still some overlap as well. So in terms of patient access and product coverage, of course, clinical value is very important. At the end of the day, that's one of the most important things, regardless of who is involved in the decision making within healthcare. But there's also things that they think of that healthcare providers and KOLs may not be as in tune with, such as the cost effectiveness, cost offsets, the overall value. So aside from clinical differentiation, all the other aspects of the product, adherence rates, cost offsets. If a product is, the same clinical outcomes, but it's a cheaper product, it's going to be preferred. On the other hand, if it's more expensive, but then there's offsets, say decreased hospitalization, decreased healthcare utilization, resource utilization, then that may be preferred over the standard of care, even though it's cheaper. So that's one thing that payers really value more so than other stakeholders and other perspectives within the healthcare delivery system is that cost perspective. And so that's where pharmacists who are able to be within industry or within consulting, in my case, we can provide services within research to really drive home the value of products. You can go ahead to the next slide. And so to that point, pharmacists are really well trained and positioned to be able to conduct this research and to be able to communicate well and understand that perspective and really be able to demonstrate a value of a product. So that's where the health economics and outcomes research comes into play. Value proposition development. That's a point where you have to tailor your messaging to the payer who will be the audience in that case, where really eliciting those points of value from a product, those clinical offsets, those what type of cost effectiveness, cost utility, cost utilization, all these different studies go into play in terms of communicating with these payers. And so there's a lot of different roles that a pharmacist can play within that space, especially with certain training, fellowship positions and different positions that prepare you well to be able to conduct this research and provide that communication. Next slide. So another aspect of this as well is market research, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Even within market access, within healthcare delivery, it still can mean a lot of different things. So a textbook definition, the systematic and objective approach to generate, refine, and evaluate marketing actions and monitor marketing performance. And so when you boil that down, it means seeing what's actually going on in terms of what the emerging trends are, what things are resonating well with different stakeholders within the healthcare delivery system. And so this offers objective and actionable insight to maximize the business results. Basically taking in whatever information you can gain from this market research and applying it to your own strategies to maximize your effectiveness. Next slide. So why is it important? In terms of the evaluation, you can assess the current strengths and weaknesses. So this can come down to a strategy in terms of, in my case, and then, back to the point of payer marketing, You want to evaluate what is being seen as most important in terms of clinical outcomes, the whatever the cost effectiveness, those types of things, seeing what's resonating, and also keeping a pulse on the trends in terms of what is some of the new trends in terms of new therapeutics, new mechanisms of action, those types of things. And then changing your focus and needs of the business. So that's taking in what you've learned from the market research, identifying those effective spots, those strengths, and then tailoring your strategy and your approach with that in mind. So that's an opportunity to identify areas of growth, recommend alternative strategies for greater impact and efficiency, and remain competitive in the market landscape. There's a lot of different ways that you can differentiate products. And so being able to communicate that and really know your audience really helps with that strategy as well. Next slide. And so once again, pharmacist contribution, same as before. We, as pharmacists, are clinicians by training. So we have a bit of a leg up in terms of understanding clinical and medical data and terminology and those types of things. So that gives you a unique advantage as a clinician, as a pharmacist within this market research, to truly have an in-depth understanding of some of these clinical trends. Ease of transition between different pharmaceutical products and services. Once again, by training, by definition, we are clinicians and we understand pharmaceutical products better than anyone else in healthcare. That's what we spent, 3 to 4 years studying specifically. So that really helps us understand that. And then same as in the next point, understanding physician, patient, and payer. All the different perspectives that Sona and I had talked about, understanding that. And within our training, we do get an overview of what the totality of the healthcare system is in a unique way that allows us to navigate that, communicate within that system, and really position ourselves well to be a key player within that space. And then, of course, at the end of the day, patient interest in mind. That's what we are always trying to do at the end of the day, is make sure that patients have better outcomes. And us as pharmacists, being able to navigate this system and pull in the market research, utilize it to create strong strategies within the healthcare space, is what helps patients have better outcomes at the end of the day. So in summary, there's a lot of different functions within marketing, market access, payer marketing, healthcare providers. There's a lot of different stakeholders that are involved in this space. Pharmacists play a very important role, as I'm sure Sona and myself and many other fellows have started to see how big a role we can actually play within this space. It's pretty fascinating to be involved in this and help create strategy. It's really a fun place to be, and using clinical knowledge to really influence commercialization strategy is an exciting place to be. And there's never a dull day. There's always something new to be learned. And so pharmacists play a really important role in that within healthcare.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. So now we will transition over to a few examples relating to the VIP case comp. So I believe a few questions was really kind of defining what is a positioning statement. So positioning statements really come into play when you're looking at how you're going to market this product and what are the key components that you want to relay forward, either for healthcare providers or for your patients as well. So this is real life. This is actually one of the messages that I saw right off the bat on the Nucala website. You guys, I'm sure, have seen this as well, but it's just a man kind of looking there, and it looks like he maybe has suffered from this disease, and it's not something to be kind of played around with or fooled around with. It's a real disease, and it's affecting him. But now there's this treatment that he's able to use, and it's able to make a difference in his disease state. So really kind of tailoring every little message that you have, whether it's on the website or whether it's on a TV commercial, to make it relevant and pertinent to the directed audience. So a lot of times positioning statements for many products, it's going to target a few components. So really looking at, who is this treatment for? Is it for adults? Is it for young patients? Is it for pregnant patients, right? Tailoring that message so that the direct audience is aware of this new product or this product that is now more efficacious than other competitors, for example. What does this treatment do? What does it do for healthcare providers? So sometimes in healthcare providers, they might transition over to a product that has less dosing because they know that their patient is probably not as adherent. So something that might make it easier for healthcare providers is something that some pharmaceutical companies might bring to the platform if it's something that's different or unique for their product. And ultimately, we're really trying to figure out what differentiates this product. So really tailoring that foundation into your VIP case competition product is going to be important to really recognize, how are you going to execute it out over the next few stages. And I think there's many components that you can do to differentiate the product, but I'll let you guys kind of think about that offline as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. So these are really some examples of core messages. So core messages are kind of those take-home components of marketing and how it promotes the product. So it can be clinical. It can be something a little bit more just factual from clinical trials or maybe from studies that they've done, but it can relate to patients and it can also relate to healthcare providers. So for example, we have better breathing, right? So we have this one kind of key message that a patient might read better breathing, or that, that relates to me. That's something I want in my disease state. I want to be able to breathe better. So kind of honing into these core messages and key components brings in that audience. But then they also kind of define it so that Nucala can improve lung function with better breathing after the first dose. And that's a very effective statement, right? If you are a patient who can't breathe, you have asthma attacks quite often, exacerbations, and after just one dose, you can breathe better. That's a very strong statement. And that statement must have been supported very well in their clinical studies, right? To be able to say something like that. So with marketing, you have to be able to support your statements, but you can make them as strong as your data is as well. And that's kind of a fun part of it, is that you're really able to kind of manipulate that information so that it makes sense and that it's something that's very impactful for that audience. So you can also see some of these numbers here, right? So for someone who's just looking at the website, looking at these numbers directly, you kind of see very high numbers. You see, less than 53% with fewer asthma attacks. That's a pretty significant number. Also up to 75%, right? So making it visually appealing is half the battle, but making these statements impactful is also kind of the other component. And then just another example is the Nucala auto-injector, right? So making it easy for the patient and the healthcare provider to know the administration and how it's, dosed or given. And if it's something unique to the product, so that's certainly something that you would want to bring to the market and want to bring to, how you promote these materials as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. What's going on, Was? No worries. So next we'll be having kind of, so going over like who are we treating. So this is literally, from the Nucala website as well. So patient profiles oftentimes are on the healthcare provider website. And as you can see here, right, where the company decided to have a little kind of patient insight into a 37-year-old male. He has frequent exacerbations, right? And it has their spirometry and all these lab assessments that physicians see quite often. So really making it very relatable to the physician so that they can recognize what kind of patients this medication would be used for is something that you would see very often. A lot of times, these medical histories and reports are reviewed or even made by pharmacists because they're the ones that understand this information. They've seen these terms before. I remember in my, pharmacy time as well, we went over and understood the FEV1 ratios, and we knew all those guidelines, right? So these are examples of what pharmacists can develop and create And this is also considered part of marketing, being able to exemplify who your patients are and essentially how physicians can recognize who to treat, and making it very easy for them on the eye to also read this information is going to be very important. Next slide, please. Perfect. And then the next one is also kind of just describing the sales force and communicating the message. So like I mentioned, a lot of pharmaceutical companies have recognized that conferences can't necessarily happen right now with the pandemic. So a lot of pharma companies have moved to online webinars. So if you go onto the Nucala website, you can also see that there's many different webinars that a physician could sign up for and take part of. And they highlight different presentations and different topics as well, which is very interesting, right? So it's bringing in that aspect of this is what our product does. These are other physicians who use our product and have found benefit from it. So trying to build that sense of community, that sense of ability to communicate the message and share the education from these clinical trials is really what pharmaceutical companies try to do with a lot of these webinars or these in-speaker sessions as well. And then on the left, you can see that there's ability for prescribers to also request a call or request an appointment with a medical expert. So making it very accessible for a prescriber to reach out to the company and ask questions. So a lot of these are unique tactics that companies do to really make sure that the prescriber can understand and reach out to someone if they have any questions or concerns, making it something that's feasible for them so that it makes it easy for them to prescribe the product. Perfect. And I think that's it. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Alex, for joining on this call and helping present today. But we are open to take any questions.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks, Alex. We do have a few questions in the chat here. The first question we have is, what is a difference between the positioning statements versus core messages?
Sure. So positioning statement is kind of that really big initial kind of force or message that you have when you're really trying to be the brand of that product. So very initially, you want to have a positioning statement to kind of be kind of the main umbrella of which your product is going to stand for. The core messages are still kind of involved with that, but they're a little bit beneath the positioning statement. So you can think of the positioning statement as your big kind of main overarching headline that's going to embrace what the brand is or the product. And the core messages are going to be a part of that, which are going to kind of embrace the positioning statement, but also have their own unique twist to it as well.
Thank you very much, Sona. I guess we have a next question over here that's asking if you can expand on the like the commercial department's strategy for marketing to payers specifically. Is it just done with research that's conducted by HEOR? And how do you communicate specifically with payers? Are there salespeople that are sent to the payers? If you can just expand on that.
Sure. So there's a lot of different ways. There are there's usually a differentiation between the commercial team and the scientific team. The commercial team's usually the one creating the types of things like the value propositions, those types of things that are going to be tools that are taken to payers to have that discussion about specific products. So you can also have scientific folks that like there's outcomes liaisons that will actually be there just to discuss a specific product and the outcomes related to that. And let me see the question here. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different HEOR work that can be conducted, like the cost effectiveness research, those types of things. And then they'll oftentimes create, results, tools, research materials that will be used to communicate to the payers by, an account executive, or in a more scientific case, there's those outcomes liaisons. So there's a lot of different positions that will play a part in that in terms of marketing to payers. So usually it's a combination of a few different moving parts in terms of that actual marketing to the payers.
Perfect, thank you. The next question we have here is if you guys could expand a little more about customer insight and explain what it is and how we as pharmacists can play a role in generating that information.
Yeah, sure. So, customer insight, I guess, is quite a large term. So, when we really look at, how are we going to tailor this product to the customers and what they want, we're looking at multiple different things, right? So, thinking more clinically, how is this product going to impact their disease? Are they going to have less exacerbations? Are they going to have better breathing, right? So, those are some things that we definitely want to focus on. Alex could also mention that part of the problem sometimes with customer insights is pricing, really looking at, is it accessible to these patients? And then we can also just look at overall like adherence. So there's multiple different components of customer insights and what that brings to the table. As a pharmacist, you typically lean towards kind of clinical efficacy. From marketing standpoint, you lean more towards, is it efficacious? Is this something that the product that the patient would benefit from? And is there kind of advantage of them taking this product over something else? But Alex could have kind of a different perspective, more so from the HUR perspective of what a customer needs.
Yeah, in that case, from an HUR market access perspective, the it goes back to the perspective. Customer insights in times can be interpreted as the payer itself. They represent millions of lives in some cases, and those decision makers are the customer in that case. And so it comes down to that as well. And yeah, so it's just a little bit different perspective in that case.
All right, I see we have another question in the chat box. So this student's asking, can you define and elaborate on what is landscape-based medical education?
Sure. I actually haven't heard that term myself too much. I've heard of more just med ed and kind of teaching out from like an internal standpoint going external. So more like speaker decks or more speaker presentations and sessions. So I'm not sure if that's kind of what the question was alluding to, but from what our agency does with med ed, it's more focused on MSL training and KOL decks and really being able to exemplify our information internally so that external folks can understand that information. So with medical education, it's really focused on, again, the data is kind of the number one component, but of course the unique traits and how this information should be strategized is something that a lot of medical education teams, including the one at my agency that I work for, really focuses on is how this is going to make an impact in prescribing methods. I'm not sure if that's, the answer to the question. I haven't heard about landscape before, so maybe a unique term.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's referring to like landscape assessment. So kind of, assessing trends of like product uptake and, prescribing trends. There's a lot of research that can be conducted to assess that in terms of, within landscape assessment usually means like, what's the market share for a specific product compared to, everything else that's being used? What are pipeline products that may impact those different market shares and the dynamics of that therapeutic area? Yeah, so there's a lot of different, I'm not sure if that answers the question either, but that's, in terms of landscape, that's usually what we go to. But in terms of education, similar to what Sona had said, we do a lot of medical team training. We actually do some of those like health system engagement folks. We do training for them as well. So yeah, not sure if that answered the question either, but yeah.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question here. It's asking, how long are core messages? Are few sentences too much?
Sure. So core messages, so kind of going back to positioning statement and core messages, both should be relatively, concise. They should be able to relay that message so that it makes sense. It's very easy to the eye, and it's able to get that message across in as little or few words as possible. I think a few sentences, if it could potentially be condensed, I think that might be a little bit more meaningful. You have to think about, from a marketing perspective, certainly you want things that are able to be read and interpreted fairly quickly, especially if we're presenting this information to healthcare providers. Oftentimes, physicians don't really, have too much time to be reading pamphlets or brochures, so they really want quick information that's relevant to them right away. But with that being said, if it takes a full couple of sentences to relay your information, that's totally acceptable. But I do encourage you to try to condense it as much as possible.
All right. There aren't any more questions, but I'll just ask one. I know, Alex, you mentioned effectiveness as being, a new thing that pharmacy companies are really looking into. What have you seen from your experience as to some of the strategies that these companies have, I guess, implemented or taken a look into how to become more cost effective or making their medication more cost effective?
Yeah, there's a lot of development in terms of real world evidence studies that are being done to kind of, supplement whatever clinical data there is to show any type of, resource utilization involved with the product. That's something that's done pretty commonly. And that helps support develop these very elaborate cost effectiveness models. There's all kinds of tools that are being used, budget impact models, the different cost effectiveness models. There's these outcomes analyzers. That's something that Exenda does, and a couple other companies do as well, which is basically just like a retroactive study in a box. You give it to a payer and they're able to run their data through it. And then you actually can see, with manipulating a few minor inputs, what the actual cost impact would be when you run it through compared to other products. So there's a lot of different ways that companies are doing that. There are certain spaces that there's more opportunity there as well. At the end of the day, oncology, there's ways to sort of, show clinical or economic value, but at the end of the day, that's one of those areas that, clinical outcomes improvement is usually going to take precedent. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I'm sure everyone's familiar in this regard with ICER. They're another company that does a lot of elaborate evaluations as well. And that leads to another part where pharmacists can play, which is basically the response and reaction to ICER evaluations that your products may be included in as well. And understanding kind of the development of the model and what the comparators are and those types of things. But it's definitely back to the first point. Real world evidence is something that's done a lot, and running a retrospective claims study to kind of see clinical outcomes over time, healthcare utilization with comparator products, and basically creating a more concrete and tangible story about the value of a product compared to just a very controlled setting within an RCT. So that's something that, and that can be applied to not just like emerging products, but it's often done as well in spaces that, companies are trying to get into. If they have a product in development, they can do these studies prior to the launch to see, what type of offsets they may be able to provide. And then they continue, as the product gets to market, they can monitor that and kind of supplement their story a little bit. So it's definitely a creative space that takes some special skills. A lot of data analytics goes into it, those types of things. So a lot of different strategies that are being used.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alex. Thank you, Sona. Thank you, Alex, for sharing so much information about market research as well as marketing and commercial and industry. So I guess, Sona, you can close out the session. We don't have any more questions.
Yeah, perfect. No, thank you so much, Maz and Amosha, and Alex, of course, for joining in today. feel free to email us your questions. And I believe the next webinar will be for the midpoint. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again, everyone, and have a good evening.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Alex.
Take care, guys.
Have a good night.
Bye.